I'm Tom Scott. The story of how I met Beatle George Harrison is a bit convoluted, but if you'll bear with me, I'll tell you the whole story. It began in the summer of 1965 while I was a junior in high school. After the semester ended, I enrolled in 2 UCLA summer extension jazz courses. The instructor, avant-garde composer trumpeter Don Ellis, taught 2 courses back-to-back, jazz improvisation and jazz composing and arranging. Don also had a new group called the Hindustani Jazz Sextet. The group's repertoire was based on odd meter rhythms, something unique to jazz at that time. The only odd meter jazz tune that achieved a measure of popularity to that point was Dave Brubeck's Take 5. Another founding member of Don's sextet was Harihar Rao, a teacher in the UCLA ethnomusicology department. He had received his music education in Calcutta, India, as a protege of famed classical sitarist Ravi Shankar. I became fascinated with complex rhythms and their potential in jazz, so after completing those summer courses, I devoted my last year in high school to weekly private lessons on the tabla drums with Harihar Rao as my teacher. Now, for those of you who weren't around in 1966, the 4 Beatles had become musical and cultural icons. Every move they made, either individually or collectively, made worldwide headlines. George Harrison wanted desperately to escape the intense public scrutiny that came with being a Beatle, and he found peace and serenity in Hindu religion and Indian classical music, particularly the music of Ravi Shankar. While I was in high school taking tabla lessons, George was in India studying sitar with his musical guru. In so doing, he inevitably thrust Ravi into the headlines. The sudden wave of publicity brought an invitation from music producer Lou Adler for Ravi to perform at the 1967 Monterey Pop Festival. He shared the stage with rock superstars like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Simon & Garfunkel. His performance of Indian classical music in the midst of this rock concert was, needless to say, unique and also highly acclaimed. 1 year later, in 1968, I received a call from a movie producer acquaintance. Ravi Shankar, I was told, had been signed to compose the musical score for an upcoming feature film called Charlie, starring Cliff Robertson. Robertson won the Best Actor Oscar for his performance, by the way. Ravi sought out former student Harihar Rao, his protege and my tabla teacher, to assemble a group of LA musicians who had knowledge of Indian music, and my name was on the list. So I was invited to a Ravi Shankar meet and greet at United Recording Studio on Sunset Boulevard. At 20 years old, I was a bit nervous as I stood in the reception line waiting to meet this iconic musician. When we came face to face, I told him I had been a student of Harihar's. With that, he replied, "Well, that makes you my grandson," and proceeded to give me a big hug. I was blown away. I thought, Ravi Shankar's hugging me. I've got to be the coolest guy on the planet right now. The recording sessions took place the following week on the Goldwyn Studios scoring stage. What a wonderful experience that was. Ravi's approach to film scoring was unconventional, to say the least. Some of his main themes were written out, but most of the time Ravi strolled around the room, a stopwatch around his neck, dictating the parts we were to play and when to play them. Ravi was not only an extremely gifted musician, but he was also a great guy, warm, funny, and totally up on Western culture, movies, television, and music. He had been raised in Paris before deciding to return to his native India in his late teens and become, as he said to me once very matter-of-factly, a sitar master. It took 7 years, and that's exactly what he did. He described how he actually lived with his teacher, practicing all day, every day under a tree, with his long hair tied to a branch to keep him from nodding off to sleep. In short, he was a truly inspiring man in every way. In the meantime, several years passed, and in 1973, George Harrison formed his own record company, Dark Horse Records. George was not at all happy with his Capitol Artists contract and couldn't wait to fulfill his remaining 3-album obligation to them so he could become an artist on his own label. In the meantime, he was free to act as a producer on Dark Horse for artists of his own choosing. His first production was Ravi Shankar, Family and Friends. I was named among the friends and eagerly accepted the offer to play on this new Ravi recording. I showed up at A&M Studio A the first day, and there in the booth sat George Harrison in the flesh. On the first 10-minute break, he came out of the booth and right over to me. He said, "You're the one who studied Indian music with Harihar, right?" I said, "Yes." "Do you enjoy listening to Indian music?" I said, "Sure." At that moment, and for the next 4 years, off and on, I became a kind of a sidekick to George Harrison. I spent weeks at a time in Friar Park, his amazing castle home in Henley-on-Thames, England, and helped in the planning of his 1974 tour and the production of his next 3 albums, Dark Horse, Extra Texture, and 33 1/3. I also watched with fascination as he began a long-distance love affair with a young Dark Horse secretary back in Los Angeles who soon became his wife, the lovely Olivia Arias. While in England, I developed a fondness for English tea, Indian food, and briefly Gitanes, French cigarettes. George smoked them constantly. So I started smoking them myself. I figured maybe the unpleasant stench wouldn't bother me if I smoked them myself. I was wrong. The George Harrison Tour was officially announced in the fall of 1974. George's band was to include me, Billy Preston, Robin Ford, and all-star rhythm and horns. George, not surprisingly, selected Ravi Shankar as his opening act. Ravi's ensemble included me, percussionist Emil Richards, and 14 Indian musicians and vocalists, most of whom had never been out of India before. George also hired rock impresario and concert promoter Bill Graham to produce the tour. Bill immediately went to work on what must have been a monumental assignment, putting together all the pieces necessary to make the George Harrison Dark Horse tour run smoothly. In the meantime, George went to work on the selections we were to play. When he came up with the final song list, it included only 4 Beatles songs. Now, because of the still intense popularity of the Beatles, rumors started to spread about how the tour might feature a Beatle reunion and how fantastic that would be. As you will see, nothing could have been further from George's mind. The tour dates were set from November 2nd through December 20th, 45 shows in 26 cities. George had never been a solo headliner on a tour of this magnitude before, and it would require a great deal of physical strength and stamina. We kidded him about being a vegetarian and how he should toughen up with a steak or perhaps a cheeseburger or 2. He took the kidding well, but did not change his diet. In October of 1974, rehearsals began on the sound stage of A&M Studios. The musicians were all pros and we all got along well. At one point, Bill Graham let it be known that he wanted to meet with George about the tour. George pulled me aside and told me he didn't want to talk to him directly, and would I speak to him instead on George's behalf. I was flattered that he entrusted me with this responsibility, and I said I would. But after all, this was a mega tour, and I was just the saxophone player, up to now. However, I took the task seriously and strolled over to Bill Graham's office. I told him I'd been asked to find out what Bill wanted, and whatever it was, I would relay it back to George. By this time, I'd gotten to know Bill somewhat. He was never a man to mince words, spoke clearly, and never held back. He was also very passionate about the music and took his job very seriously, and I liked him right away. He told me with great enthusiasm that, on the one hand, the tour had gone clean, meaning that all the dates had sold out. "Wow, that's great," I said. And then his tone changed. "Tom," he said, "you've got to try and convince George to do more Beatles songs. That's what the people want, and he'll get a lot of heat if he doesn't." I told Bill I would relay the message back to George. Once I did, George's response was clear. "Tom, I used to be a Beatle. I'm not a Beatle anymore. I'm through with that part of my life, and I'm moving on. If people who bought tickets want their money back, I'll give it to them." "Okay, if that's what you want, I'll let Bill know." Bill was understandably displeased with George and what he had said, knowing what criticism lay ahead, but his devotion to the success of the tour, no matter what, remained unchanged. The tour itself was, in a word, surreal. I got to sit right next to Ravi during the Indian music set, and every night was a privilege listening to his incredible improvisations. Although it is referred to as Indian classical music, it has much more in common with jazz because it is all improvised. There was then an intermission, and then over the loudspeakers came, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome George Harrison," followed by the deafening sound of 15,000 to 20,000 people going nuts as the band filed on stage. It was, as I said, surreal. George's treatment of the musicians was incomparable. We stayed at all the best hotels and flew on a customized 747 jet with a giant Om symbol painted on either side. The first-class seats had been removed and replaced with beanbag chairs for our comfort. George's and Ravi's bands had the opportunity to get better acquainted with each other during these flights, and we enjoyed each other's company immensely. Alas, however, the relentless tour schedule took a toll on George's voice. He suffered from hoarseness through much of it, but we all adored him and did all we could to support him on this history-making tour.